Welcome to the You're Not Crazy podcast, hosted by Jessica Knight, a certified life coach who specializes in healing from narcissistic and emotional abuse. This podcast is intended to help you identify manipulative and abusive behavior, set boundaries with yourself and others, and heal the relationship with yourself so you can learn to love in a healthy way. You can connect with Jessica and find additional resources, content, and coaching at emotionalabusecoach.com.
Hello, and thank you for being here today. Before we dive in, I want to just give you some background on where to find me, because as we get into this episode, we're going to kind of get into the ins and outs, and there won't be time or space for that. And so you can find me at Emotional Abuse Coach on Instagram, at emotionalabusecoach.com. If you want a validation session, which is basically a one-off call with me, you can book that online. And if there isn't a time that works for you, you can reach out to me. The clarity call is for long-term work together. It's basically a one-on-one so that we get on the same page and move forward from there. So it's, we talk about what's been going on for you and how I might be able to help. And you could also book that online on my website, emotionalabusecoach.com. And then if this topic is one that stands out to you and you're like, this sounds like what I'm going through, head over to my Substack, because that's where I'm going to be talking about this topic all week, all month, really. There will be a blog on there too on this topic. And so I think that there are so many intricacies and there's so many ins and outs, and like on Substack is where I've really been sharing more content for those who can't do coaching or prefer to read, but I've been trying to use it as a place that can become more of a community. So head over to Substack. The link is in the bio if you need that. But like this topic today is usually a perfect fit for a validation session. And so a lot of people come here and they wonder, what am I going through, and am I going crazy? And this topic is about breaking free from a toxic relationship. And I named it When Rules Don't Apply, because if you're breaking free from a toxic or an abusive relationship, the rules of a quote unquote normal breakup don't apply. And now I usually joke and say, like, when do we ever go through a normal breakup? And it's time to stop putting a bow on this like giant mess and calling it closure, because it's not amicable. This isn't like how we envision maybe a healthy relationship would end, with mutual respect. You don't go, walk away and wish each other the best. Give a hug and thank each other for the time spent together. Like, this is like the dismantling of a manipulative, soul-crushing dynamic that has left you questioning your worth and your reality and your sanity. You're not dealing with somebody who respects your boundaries, your accountability, or fairness. You're dealing with someone who is fighting tooth and nail to keep control over the narrative and of you. And all and any of the advice other people have, including the millions of voices of creators on the internet and breakup blogs and Cosmopolitan magazine, will not resonate with what you're going through, because it is entirely different. And so all those people that are saying you should just let go and move on and move forward, they likely don't have any idea what you're actually experiencing internally. And while this podcast will not talk about a trauma bond specifically, that's absolutely what is going on here. And I highly recommend reading and or listening to some of my content on trauma bonding. But I want to focus today on the breakup and the part of the breakup, right? Because some of those other words can get confusing, especially if you're like, what am I experiencing? So let's start with the breakup that doesn't feel like a breakup. In a toxic relationship, the end rarely feels like an actual ending. Maybe they broke up with you, or maybe you initiated it. But either way, it doesn't feel over in most cases. Now, why is that? And that's because they're not letting it be over. And you might not be letting it be over either. And you're not imagining it. It's not like, if you're wondering, like, how am I just not letting go? Instead, a toxic partner or toxic relationships, they don't end relationships the way healthy people would. They're not looking for closure. They're actually probably looking to leave the door cracked open enough to pull you back in when they want to. They leave physical items with you. You'll have open issues together, like concert tickets you pay for, trips booked together that they either communicate a lot about or refuse to communicate about. And they use vague promises, promising change, they continue to manipulate or they outright guilt you to keep the emotional connection alive, even after the breakup. And this is why you find yourself asking yourself things like, why doesn't this feel final? Why is he still reaching out if he said it was over? Why do I feel like I'm the one who has to end it over and over again? And the reason it doesn't feel over is because he doesn't want it to be over, or they don't want it to be over. And it feels messy and it's so uncomfortable. And like, even, in your heart of hearts, if you're like, I don't want this to end, but it has to end, it still may not get to a point of feeling over. When you have that sinking feeling of like, he's just going to twist this around again, it's not your paranoia. And I understand that I'm using like a lot of he's and a lot of this, and then like, that is my experience. Like I'm heterosexual. So like, I think in the she, he, that was my experience, but this obviously can go for, from a guy feeling this about a girl. Like, and I coach people on this and I see it all the time. And like, honestly, my client base is probably 60% women, 40% men at this point. So you are not alone. If you're a male listening to this, try it. It's, for me to say what I want to say is probably best if it comes out naturally, which is kind of using the he pronoun. But if this is not your experience, please do your best just to hear it with the other. I do try and make my content as gender neutral as possible. But for this topic, especially this one, is like, I've experienced this so deeply, it's going to come out in this way, most likely. But back to where I was about like that feeling of like, if this is just going to get twisted around again, it's your instincts screaming at you to pay attention. Your instincts are screaming at you to pay attention because of the pattern to gaslight, to guilt trip, to manipulate. And you're absolutely right to think they're going to do it again. They've done it again. And that's literally all you know. And you've probably seen this play out over and over again. They'll say things like, I can't believe you're saying this. This isn't what you said yesterday, when it's exactly what you said yesterday. You made me feel like there was hope, because he heard hope where there was none offered, that you would just jump back into something that was toxic. They'll say things, I was just there for you. And then like insert vulnerable moment, like an issue at work where you felt your job was on the line. And like in that instance, they're weaponizing your pain to keep you feeling indebted to them. And the emotional whiplash of this dynamic is exhausting. 1 minute, you're showered with declarations of love, and the next, you're being berated for setting boundaries. And then, just as you're ready to close the door for good, they dangle a silver false hope that they might change. And when that door is closed, they find a way to bring you and all of your stuff with letters and flowers and get you back in. And it doesn't make sense because it's not supposed to make sense. The goal isn't resolution. It's to keep you stuck in the cycle of abuse. And it reminded me of this quote that I watched myself go from the happiest, most outgoing person to fighting every day to heal. And so why don't the regular, cut it off, no contact, move forward, breakup rules work here? A healthy breakup is generally as a structure: mutual respect, parting ways, a clean break, time to grieve, and eventual healing. Toxic relationships, there are no rules, yet they're built to keep you stuck. Healthy breakup logic doesn't work with toxic behavior. Trying to leave on good terms only gives them a chance to exploit your kindness and to blame you further. And many of you will know that if you did try and like sort of have like a healthy closing conversation or healthy conversation where you get on the same page, it always gets derailed. Their promises actually mean nothing. They offer to change, but the actions show otherwise. So the patterns don't lie, even though the words are lying. And boundaries that you set feel impossible to enforce. They don't see them as boundaries. They see them as obstacles to control. They'll tell you that you are being controlling when you set boundaries or that you are preventing them from healing. That happens all the time. You set a boundary and they're like, you're not letting me heal. It's like, well, actually, you're not letting me heal, but I clearly don't exist in this dynamic, according to you. And I often describe it as like you're playing chess, trying to strategize what your next move is to move forward. And they're playing a completely different game, something more like Guess Who, where they keep changing the rules. And the only objective is to win, no matter what the cost is to you and to your mental health. And this creates this emotional tug of war. One of the hardest parts of a toxic breakup is the confusion that you feel. And if you've been in this place, you probably said things to yourself like, why does this not feel right? Why do I feel guilty for setting boundaries? Why am I questioning myself so much? That's the cycle of manipulation at work. It's designed to keep you doubting yourself. And because you're somebody who values kindness, fairness, integrity, you keep trying to do the quote unquote right thing. You keep wondering when this will feel okay. But here's the thing. Kindness to them cannot come at the expense to yourself. You're likely being flexible with your boundaries and with your perspective because you want this to feel okay. But I am sure it felt like every time you tried to take care of yourself, they are taking it as a personal attack. I often felt like manipulation and isolation was part of the game. Toxic partners don't just manipulate. You've probably noticed how they try to isolate you too. Maybe they make snide comments about your friends, or they convince you your family doesn't understand, or they guilted you into spending all your time with them. They likely also berated you for talking to your friends about how you felt in the relationship and called it a betrayal. This isolation is not accidental. It's a calculated tactic to cut you off from people who could give you perspective or support, because the goal here is to really make you feel dependent on them and to question your own reality. And that way, you only trust their reality. It's really sick and really twisted. And when you start to recognize that pattern, it's not just seeing a red flag, you usually start to see the whole parade. And so I'm going to share the thing that helped me the most in my healing, which was realizing that the patterns speak louder than the words. And when you're stuck in the cycle, it's easy to latch on to promises. I've changed. I'll do whatever it takes to make it work. I just need one more chance. But then you can ask yourself, do their actions actually align with their words? And then you have to ask yourself that again and again and again. What stands out more, the promises they're making now or the patterns they've shown all along? The patterns have likely been riddled with manipulation, gaslighting, and boundary violations. These things don't magically disappear in 2 weeks or 2 days in some cases of them claiming to work on themselves. The patterns and the things that have happened continuously that you felt and know did not change are really important for you to look at and to get clear on. And this is why no contact helps. And if you're struggling to cut contact, remind yourself this isn't about being mean. It's about your personal, mental, and emotional safety. I know no contact is very hard. I've talked about it a lot. I've traditionally had such a hard time doing it. There's a podcast I have on no contact, and I will link it in the show notes, but it basically says that it's not about punishing them. It's about protecting yourself. Every message that they send is a chance for them to twist the narrative or to guilt trip you or to reel you back in. And it feeds the addiction because it probably feels like an addiction. And removing that access is an act of self-preservation for yourself, but I understand that it's hard. And like I said, I've traditionally had a very hard time with this. So let's talk about how you can begin to break the cycle. You can set boundaries without an apology. Your boundaries have to become non-negotiable. You don't have to explain or justify them. You can set the boundary. You can block them if you feel ready. No contact really is the cleanest and healthiest way to protect yourself. Remember that it's not about them, it's about your well-being. If you can't do this, then limit communication as much as you can. Set rules for yourself to follow. Like, I will respond once a day. I'll respond at the end of the day. I'm not reading any messages until the end of the day. You get to create the rules, but just create some rules that you can follow. Focus on the patterns and not the words. When you are tempted to believe the promises, remember the behavior. Actions speak louder than words. Make a list of all the things that they promised and what actually happened. This does help you ungaslight yourself. You can reclaim your narrative. You're not walking away because you're giving up. You're walking away because you're choosing yourself. You're walking away because this doesn't feel good and you want to feel better. As a life coach, I help people with this all of the time, but you can also get a therapist, a support group to help you process what you just went through and rebuild that sense of self. And just set small goals. I tell people just to really focus on little things, incremental victories, like a day without checking their social media, or 1 week of no contact, or a day of no contact. These steps add up, and you need to give yourself something that you can achieve. And lastly, this is the hardest thing for me, at least, was the ending. I remember asking myself, how is this over? How can I just move around and let his narrative be the narrative? He constructed a whole new narrative. And this is a powerful reframe. You already said goodbye. You already said goodbye. It might not have been the way you wanted to. You might not have been all these other things, but you've already said goodbye. The actual closure conversation is not for them. It's really for you. The goodbye is when you realized that his promises meant nothing. The goodbye is when you decided that you deserved peace. The goodbye is when you recognized that the patterns of manipulation and you started to refuse to play the game. A lot of the times, many times, the closure conversation, quote unquote, ends up becoming a monologue on how they are right, not a conversation to get to a mutual understanding between two healthy individuals. And breaking free from a toxic relationship doesn't look like a tidy mutual goodbye. It's messy. It's hard. It doesn't come with the closure that you're used to or that you envision in healthy dynamics. But you don't need their permission to end this. You don't need their understanding, their approval, their agreement, because it's not about them anymore. It's about you. And you're choosing the path to feel more free. I really hope that this was helpful. I really hope it was validating. I was really hoping that this would help you see what's actually going on. Now, this topic, I will be diving into various parts and ins and outs of it on Substack this month. And I will be addressing the issue of closure and closure manipulation later this month too. If this resonated with you, please know that you are not alone and you are certainly not crazy. As always, you can find me at emotionalabusecoach.com. You can follow me on Instagram at emotionalabusecoach, and you can email me at jessica@jessicaknightcoaching.com.